Let's begin with the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, probably should use a different opening prayer since the Our Father doesn't come about until Matthew's Gospel. That's going to be 10 years from now. So we've been listening to Mark tell his faith story of Jesus. He's told us some interesting things that apparently the characters inside the story haven't caught on. He told us in the beginning this was the good news of Jesus Christ, the Son of God, kind of telling us the whole thing right there. Then at the baptism, he told us again, this is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Transfiguration scene, that same voice, apparently the voice of God. This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Listen to him. But the people inside don't seem to catch that. As he started out in what we call the Galilean ministry. When he left home in Nazareth, he went up north. And the way the story is portrayed in those first 7 chapters, he's pretty successful. People seem to like him. He has a big crowd that seems to follow him every place. But if you stop for a minute and think about it and ask yourself, well, what is it that's attracting those people? What do they find about him that causes them to, search him out, find wherever he is? And then we discover, or it becomes apparent, it's really not because of what he says. There's no indication they really understand much of what he says. They're attracted to what he can do. And what he can do, and what he can do for them, is miracles. They're flocking to him because he is a divine miracle worker. And he will cure almost anybody. And so that's how they are understanding him. Jesus is a divine miracle worker. And it pushed further. And if you'd say, is that why you believe he's God? They probably would say, well, we don't know if we believe he's God or not, but we do believe he can do miracles. And that's really what we're after. That starts to cause attention. Because while he gets very popular as the story unfolds, he also gets more and more disgruntled at the fact that people don't really know who he is, and they're latching on to those miracles. And so every once in a while, he'll do a miracle, but it'll have a cutting edge to it. You can tell there's more going on here than just him healing somebody. We saw that when he did the man with the withered arm, remember that? And that was not just about, can I heal a withered arm? That's all about the purity laws and the scribes and the Pharisees trying to corner him. And he's angry, and he breaks all the laws he can think of right there. It's the Sabbath in the synagogue with a man who doesn't really need healing at that moment. And we're told in the story, and he's angry, and he has a guy stretch out his arm. And you can tell that the tension is starting to rise. That will continue on. We saw when he went home finally in chapter 6, he hadn't been home since he left. When he went home, we discovered that they weren't enamored with him at all. This is just a guy that used to live down here, down the block. We all know who his family are and all that. So I don't know why he came back. He wasn't doing any of that stuff that he claims he do. When he was here, he didn't heal anybody, he didn't preach, he didn't do any of that sort of stuff. So why now? And then at the end of that story it says, he could do no deeds of power because of their hardness of heart. Their hardness of heart. They don't have a clue who he is. He won't go back into town after this. He goes home, or after he gets going to home, and then they reject him. He generally hangs out on the outskirts, so he doesn't really know what the mainstream is saying. What's the press saying about me, and what are the rumors, or any of that sort of stuff. So in chapter 8, Mark addresses that issue a little bit, starting in verse 27. Mark is going to go in chapter 8, 9, and 10, and he's going to say, here is my teaching on discipleship, which is far more what I'm interested in than doing more of these miracles. So he's got his group around him. It says, Jesus went on with his disciples to a village of Caesarea Philippi. That's where his home away from home tends to be. And on the way, he asked his disciples, who do people say that I am? It's a good question. You would not necessarily know. Word probably has gotten around, so there must be some rumors, And they answered him, John the Baptist, others, Elijah, still others, one of the prophets. That's probably accurate. Some think the prophet might have been Jeremiah. That seems to have been a favorite of his. But, that's what he would expect, those kinds of rumors. And he asked them, point blank now, he's not saying what do people say now. He's pointing the finger. But who do you say that I am? Peter answered him, you are the Messiah. Well, that's kind of shocking. We don't expect that kind of response from Peter, one that is accurate and correct. He's not usually that way. He doesn't seem to be much in the forefront of that, but he's got it right. This is it. He gets an A. This is exactly who Jesus is. And he sternly ordered them not to tell anyone about him. That's that messianic secret. Remember, we talked about that yesterday. Kind of a marked inclusion here, trying to give us the reasons why more people don't know about Jesus. But for Mark also, it is, I don't want to be identified as a divine miracle worker. Then he began to teach them. So now he's going to say, okay, you got this right. Way to go, Pete. You got it right. Now, let me explain to you what that means. When you said, I am the Messiah, that's right. That's correct. But now I'm going to tell you how I understand that. Then he began to teach them that the Son of Man must undergo great suffering, be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. He said this quite openly. Well, now comes an interesting response. And Peter, remember, Peter, we just gave him an A, right answer. And Peter turned to him, took him aside, and began to rebuke him. Now, this is Peter rebuking Jesus. But turning and looking at his disciples, Jesus rebuked Peter. Well, they're into it big time here. And he said, get behind me, Satan. That's a curse. He has gone from an A student to a curse in about 3 lines. "Get behind me, Satan, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things." Now, a lot of commentators will kind of beat up on Peter, think, well, he should know who Jesus is by now. That's typical Peter. He never quite catches on. He's a person of little faith. He has some faith, but it's not really big. On and on and on. If we would have been there, however, if we'd have been in that audience and we'd have watched this dispute unfold and we would have heard Jesus say, "Here's what it means for me to be the Messiah," and then he started talking about that suffering and dying, being buried, and then rise again. And then we watched Peter just get upset, really seriously upset. We would have been on Peter's side. Most of us would have said, "Way to go, Pete, you're right." And the reason we would have been on Peter's side is because we would not have been able to understand any notion of a Messiah who would suffer and die. A Messiah was supposed to be the anointed one. Messiah in Greek means anointed. Mashiach in Hebrew. Christos in Greek. And the Messiah was understood to be like King David. King David was the preeminent anointed one. King David was the example of what a Messiah is about. He's a warrior. He's powerful. He brought Israel to where it was the greatest nation ever, before or after his time. And so anytime we think of a Messiah, we're thinking of a military person who's going to come into this area and he's going to kick the Romans out and he's going to give us back our land, and finally things will be turned around as justice would demand. And yes, he won't get hurt at all. He's going to be like Daniel, who tells us in chapter 7, verse 14, about the Son of Man floating in on this white cloud, a certain mystical element. Nobody touches him. He's totally successful. He does his work, he gets back on his cloud, he goes home. The idea of a crucified or a dead Messiah would be a contradiction in terms. Who wants a dead Messiah? That's just one more thing to bury. We don't really care about a dead Messiah. And yet, that's exactly what Jesus says. My self-definition of a Messiah is one who is going to be killed. And before that, he's going to suffer and be beaten up and then get killed as an insurrectionist and a runaway slave on a cross. We would just shake our heads and say, really? Who needs that? Who wants that? So Jesus has now predicted what's going to happen to him, his passion. And he's given an explanation of that. And the response has been a misunderstanding. They do not understand what he is saying, or how he can say that, how he can put those things together. Messiah, death, all of those kinds of things. So now comes the third part. And that is the corrective teaching. Now Jesus is going to come back. Hopefully they've sort of settled down a little bit. And he's going to give them, here's the correct understanding of what it means to be my followers, if you want to be a follower of mine. He called the crowd with his disciples and said to them, now he's talking to us, if any want to become my followers, and assumingly we would want that, let them deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me. Well, that's not exactly what we wanted. That's not exactly what we understood discipleship to be. That's not what's impressed us about him. What's impressed us about him is he can do miracles. He can heal people. He can take care of our needs. That's what's been impressive. Not this stuff. Deny ourselves, take up our cross, and follow me. The cliche about a cross, some would say, well, this didn't come from Jesus because he hadn't been on the cross yet. How would he even know about taking up the cross? Well, the cross has been around as an instrument of capital punishment starting about 300 years before the time of Jesus, originated in Persia, of all places. And it was always understood as the most derogatory, the most degrading form of capital punishment. It had always been reserved for people who were insurrectionists and people who were considered to be runaway slaves. Once the practice got into Rome, the Roman government quickly made a law: no Roman citizen can be crucified. They don't have to put up with that kind of degrading activity. If you're going to have somebody punished and a capital punishment, well, do something decent, like stone him to death or something, but you don't hang him on a cross. That's just way below us. So that phrase, pick up your cross, or something like that, that could have easily been circulating at the time of Jesus. So very easily he could have said this. For those who want to save their life will lose it. And those who lose their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it. Now, does that make sense to anybody? For those who want to save their life. Well, wouldn't that be us? We would like to save our life, as much as we can understand what that means. We would like that. We're hoping some way that will be the case. Our life will be saved, salvation. But then when it is, and how do you do that? Well, you lose your life. Well, I thought you just said we saved it. Well, you do kind of, but it's not quite that easy, you see, because the life you are trying to save really isn't life at all. And it really isn't life at all because it's basically the way you live in the kingdom of Caesar. And in the kingdom of Caesar, we're not really about saving life. That's not really what we are about. And if you go with the understanding of the kingdom of Caesar, then you end up like Caesar. And it's about power and might and glory and honor and all those kinds of great things that we're all looking for. And what Jesus says here is, that's no life at all. That life won't guarantee you anything. And not only that, it won't last for very long. Ultimately, you will die, and then it'll be over. For those who want to save their life will lose it. Meaning, real life is somewhere other than with Caesar, the way we live. Domination, power, violence, getting what we want so we can be big and let other people be small. Stuff that's going on all over the world today. That's not life. That's not the gospel life. That's not the life Jesus came to proclaim, nor is it the life he's going to die for. Much of what our life on earth is about is losing that life, not being tucked in by that, not being overpowered by the attractiveness of being in power, having it all, being number one. Rather, it has to go in the opposite direction. And those who lose their life for my sake, and that's what the motivation is not just for any old reason, but for the sake of following Jesus. If we're willing to lose our life for that, then the good news is you'll gain your life, but it won't be your old life. And so much of what Christian asceticism has been since this time is confronting the false sense of self. What really makes me be me? Well, I can control you. I'm better than you. I'm going to be ahead of you. That's what's going to make me be me. And I'll do whatever it takes because that's what they told me. They told me that when I was little, I should go to school. That's a bummer. Why should I go to school? Well, so you can learn things. Why do I want to learn things? You want to learn things so that you can get a good job. Really? What do I want a good job for? You want a good job so you can make money. Oh, well, I see, yeah. What's that supposed to do? Money will give you the number one thing you're looking for. Security. You can't have too much money because you can't be too secure, can you? And what are we all after? Security. They tell it everywhere, you know. The insurance companies tell us that. No, your insurance agent never come up to you and said, you know, I reviewed your policies. You're way overinsured. Here, I got a refund for you. No, they're not going to say that. They're going to tell you, we looked at your policies and you don't have tsunami insurance. Really? No, we looked. Well, you know the last time a tsunami blew through the Bahamas? Took the dinosaurs with them. See, you just never know. Never know. And just for a few $1,000s more, we can protect you. That's a little caricature, of course, but not awfully much caricature. That's how they deal. They scare us all the time. And then what's the big fallacy in all this? The big fallacy is there is no such thing as security. Because you and I are going to die. And we don't know when. But the things we do know two things. We brought nothing with us and we take nothing with us. You can have all the money you want, all the property, all the prestige, all the power, and you die. The great leveler. That's the thing we need to confront. That's what that false sense of self is built on. That there is a way, and this is how Caesar will proclaim it to you, there is a way you can have that security. There's a way you can do that. We found that in the country I live in 9/11, when we had all that trouble with being bombed and 9/11 stuff that went on. Everybody was panicky, and they started promising us, you need to be more secure, don't you? Well, here's how we'll do it. And they said, it's kind of a trade-off. We'll take some of your rights away, you know, we're going to, like your library card, your telephone number, your all that. And people just willingly, they're so petrified and so convinced that security is what they need. Take whatever you want. Go ahead. I don't care as long as I'm secure. Well, they took everything. They didn't get secure, though. It's still as bad. It goes all the way back to Jesus and his teaching about security. For what will it profit them to gain the whole world and forfeit their life? That's a good question to sort of reflect on. Well, we don't know what their response was to that, all of that, except we know that Peter kind of voiced our opinion, and now that Jesus kind of blew him away with all that, we're wondering now what are we supposed to do? How are we supposed to gain our life? How are we supposed to lose it? All of that sort of stuff. So Mark says, okay, I'll show him some more things. I'll show you some more things. We'll have a couple more healings. Then chapter 9, starting verse 30. Mark says, we'll do this again. I don't know if you caught it the first time back in chapter 8, but now we're in chapter 9. You've had a little chance to think about this. So they went on from there, passed through Galilee. He did not want anyone to know it, for he was teaching his disciples. I don't know if he was embarrassed by their inability to understand anything, and so he didn't want anybody to say to them. So now he's going to talk about his suffering and death for the second time. He's already told them once, but we don't have any clue that they understood it. Now you're going to do it the second time. Saying to them, the Son of Man is to be betrayed into human hands, and they will kill him. 3 days after being killed, he will rise again. So he's already told them that once. Now he point blank told them the second time. Here's the response of the disciples. Their misunderstanding. But they did not understand what he was saying and were afraid to ask him. Now notice, this is chapter 9. There's only 16 chapters. We're way beyond halfway through the story. And the disciples still don't understand who he is. After all, he's been telling them from the opening verse right down to this one. They have no idea. They did not understand. And not only that, but now raises the other emotion. They were afraid to ask. We're going to start seeing, if you read the gospel from here on out, this phrase of being afraid and being astounded, being afraid to ask, fear versus hope. And so as they go on, their fear is going to build while their faith is going to diminish. So Mark sets up that dichotomy. Where they should be gaining more understanding, knowledge, they're gaining less. And so they're headed down the wrong way until finally they're just petrified. And that starts right here. They were afraid to ask after all they've been through. Then they came to Capernaum. And when he was in the house with them, he asked them, what were you arguing about on the way? Now, he probably hoping against hope, Maybe they're arguing about something I actually said. Maybe they grabbed hold of a syllable or two they could grab, and maybe that's why, hopefully, that'd be better than nothing. Well, it's mostly nothing. What were they arguing about on the way? But they were silent. For on the way, they had argued with one another about who was the greatest. Now, how far in the opposite direction could you go? He is talking to them about himself. Suffering, death, burial, finally, resurrection. What are they talking about? Who do you suppose is the greatest? Probably me, don't you think? Yeah, well, no, you probably think you, but that's where you're wrong, because I've done all I can to be great. And if you were smart, you'd do all you could to be great, because, greatness is where it is. Greatness right up there with being number one. It sounds ludicrous, but that's how far off they are. That's what it's like in the kingdom of Caesar. Once you get in the grasp of the kingdom of Caesar, it's almost impossible to get out. They promise you everything and deliver nothing. He sat down, called the 12, and said to them, now here comes the corrective teaching. Remember how each one of these works. Prediction of the passion, misunderstanding, corrective teaching. So here comes the corrective teaching. Whoever wants to be first must be last of all and servant of all. So now he's added an thing here. Servant. The word in Greek for servant is doulos. It can also be translated slave. We get what it means, servant. This, of course, is where you have the origin of that current concept called servant leadership. that a lot of business people think Robert Greenleaf invented because he was the one who did the book on servant leadership, first of all, but it really is older than him. He really picked it up out of this gospel right here. This is where it all begins. It's about servanthood, not about grasping and gaining, but about giving. Whoever wants to be first must be last of all and servant of all. Then he took a little child and he put it among them. And taking it in his hands, he said to them, "Whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me. And whoever welcomes me welcomes not me, but the one who sent me." Now, commentators and devotional writers like this little visual aid Jesus used of a child because they think the point of that is we have them before they've been all messed up by adulthood. That's where we need to, some way we need to back up so we can capture that innocence and all that goes with that. That's what some commentators would say, and a lot of devotional writers would say that. Mark would not say that. Mark would say, you missed the whole point. This is a visual aid, all right, and everybody there would have understood it. When he takes this little child and sort of points out, remember what he said, here's what you have to be like, you want to be number one, you have to be last of all. And so when he brought a little child, everybody knew that socially a child was a nothing. Now that doesn't mean they didn't like children or they did something bad to children or whatnot. It's just socially, when you start out in life, you start out at the bottom rung. And then as you grow up and mature and so forth, you go up the ladder. The goal is always to get as high as you can. That's considered to be a successful living. But everybody knows, when you start out, you're nothing. You're a little child, cannot inherit anything. They don't have any say in whatsoever. They can't do anything. They're just a nothing right now. The disciples, of course, and most of us, say, we want to be up here. That's our goal. Our goal is to be number one. Jesus comes along and says, no, really. Here's what your goal should be. 0. Well, who's going to do that? Who's going to be 0? Well, because that is the false sense of life that you are chasing. You are chasing a life that really doesn't exist. And ultimately what will happen is you'll never get to the top. And even if you get a sufficient amount of worldly goods that makes it look like you're in pretty good shape, your biggest worry is going to be how to keep them and how to let somebody else not come in and take them from you. So most of your life will be consumed by taking what you have and protecting it. Nobody wants to go down here. And yet that's exactly what Jesus says. Real life is down here. Real life is not up here. But his disciples don't understand that. They probably don't believe it, even if they would understand it. And we got the same situation today. We don't really believe much of that. We believe, no, you go up. And then we even have this strange idea that the generation after us should even get higher. Should get higher. And in our area, in our understanding, we say, there's no ending to this. There is no ending to how much you can have. If you have enough ingenuity and enough intelligence and whatnot, it's unlimited. You can go right up through the sky. And people believe that. And that's oftentimes their goal. They don't get there, but we don't seem to pay much attention to what about all those people that never got there? Well, they could have. If they'd have been like me, they could have. On and on we go. Whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me. Whoever welcomes me welcomes not me, but the one who sent me. And what happens if we don't do that? What happens if we just keep going business as usual? Well, when you go home tonight, turn on one of those channels that claim to be news. Doesn't matter which one, they're all same. You know, talking heads. They don't need ears, nobody listens. And they're going to give you a bunch of raw data. And they're not going to know how to interpret it, and they're going to scare you to death, of course, because all we're doing is we're watching these talking heads give us a whole bunch of stuff that we're not quite sure what to make out of it. And they're going to show us pictures to make us believe that that's the real thing that they're showing us there. And basically it's a message that the world's going to hell in a handbasket, and here's some pictures of it. Better be prepared. Prepared how? Well, vote for me, or vote for that person, or do what I'm doing, or, well, you're not much better. Well, too bad, here. And then we don't know what's going on. News, that's supposed to be. Selected short tragedies calculated to let you think the world's going to hell in a handbasket. And it works. It works if that's where we get most of our information. Well, he's going to try again. By this time, he probably isn't expecting much. Chapter 10. And in between these chapters, Mark gives you some more vignettes, shows you Jesus at work, still trying to proclaim the gospel, still trying to get his followers to understand what this is all about. But all they like are the miracles. They like the power. They were on their road going up to Jerusalem. Jesus was walking ahead of them. They were amazed, and those who followed were afraid. So we're going to get that phrase quite a bit. Amazed and afraid, amazed and afraid. After all this time, watching him, hearing him, and they're amazed and they're afraid. He took the 12 aside and again began to tell them what was going to happen to him, saying, "See, we are going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be handed over to the chief priests and the scribes. They'll condemn him to death. Then they will hand him over to the Gentiles. They will mock him, spit upon him, flog him, kill him. After 3 days he will rise again." You'll notice the disciples never seem to hear that last phrase in each one of these predictions, and that is, he will rise again. All they get is the death. They can't really get beyond that to the next step. That death is not the final answer. There's something else. They don't really comprehend that. They will mock him, spit upon him, flog him, kill him, and after 3 days he will rise again. Here comes a response. James and John, sons of Zebedee, remember these are the guys in the boat, discipleship. James and John, sons of Zebedee, came forward to him and said to him, "Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever you ask, whatever we ask of you." And he said to them, "What is it you want me to do for you?" And they said to him, "Grant us to sit, one at your right and one at your left hand, in your glory." Well, you can see what they're looking for. Now there's irony here, of course. Mark would hope we would catch it. If you know how the story ends up, those positions on the right and on the left of him, they're going to be crosses. They're going to have criminals hanging on them. That's not really what these guys are asking for. But Jesus said to them, "You do not know what you are asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink, or be baptized with the baptism that I am baptized with?" They replied, "We are able." Don't believe them, they're not. And they won't be. Then Jesus said to them, "The cup that I drink, you will drink. and with the baptism with which I am baptized, you will be baptized. But to sit at my right hand or my left is not mine to grant, but it is for those for whom it has been prepared. Matthew didn't like this story. He didn't think James and John should be portrayed like that. So Matthew will have their mother go ask Jesus. Blame her, you know. Mark probably has it right. These guys were going after it themselves. When the 10 heard this, they began to be angry with James and John. Now the commentators will tell you they're angry because they see through this. They see how wrong this is, what Peter and James are asking for, or James and John are asking for. I don't think that's the case at all. I think they're angry because they are afraid they might get them. That they had the gall to ask for this and Jesus is going to give it to them and we're left out of here. I think that's why they're angry. So Jesus called them and said to them, once again, the corrective teaching. You know that among the Gentiles, those whom they recognize as their rulers lord it over them. And their great ones are tyrants over them. But it is not so among you. Many think that in Mark's community, maybe this was what was actually going on. They were assuming these positions. The leaders in the communities were becoming tyrants. And so Mark wants to catch that right before it gets out of hand. But it is not so among you. Whoever wishes to become great among you must be your servant. And whoever wishes to be first among you must be slave of all. For the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. This example about not being served, but to serve others is very important in the ordination rite for both deacons and priests. The bishop, as he's got them right there in front of him, he reminds them that they're not being ordained to some kind of divine glory, but he actually quotes this, where the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve. Of course, the implication is that's what you're supposed to be if you're ordained. You're not being ordained to be a king, you're being ordained to be a servant. And it makes that real. The ritual for ordination makes that real clear. They don't catch on. He's not going to teach them anymore. That's the last time. He tried 3 times. I mean, if you can't go with that. He made it pretty clear. What Mark does now, early on in passages we didn't read, there's 2 passages where Jesus will multiply loaves and fishes. First one, there's 5,000 people. Second one, there's 4,000 people. And they don't catch that either. He's trying to let them understand who it was that multiplied these loaves. And he wants them to recall back in Exodus when Moses had this problem with his people, God intervened and fed the people miraculously with manna from heaven, showing that God will take care of the people even in their distress. And so Jesus has now done basically the same thing. Mark is hoping that the disciples will be able to make the connection between God miraculously feeding his people and the Son of God miraculously feeding his people. Doesn't work, as you might guess. They don't catch it. So in that story, after those 2 events, he kind of tells an ironic story about a blind person, because he wants to show you in these stories the people who are really blind can see, and the people who can see think that they can see are blind. He's going to do that again after he's done this 3 passion predictions, 3 misunderstandings, 3 corrective teachings. Here's his little summary story. They came to Jericho, As he and his disciples and a large crowd were leaving Jericho, Bartimaeus, son of Timaeus, a blind beggar, was sitting by the roadside. When he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to shout out and say, "Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me." Well, son of David is a messianic title. How did he know that? How does he know who Jesus is? He's blind. The guys who've been hanging out with Jesus, at least physically, can see. They haven't caught on to this at all, ever. "Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me." Many sternly ordered him to be quiet. But he cried out even more loudly, "Son of David, have mercy on me." Jesus stood still and said, "Call him here." And they called the blind man, saying to him, "Take heart, get up, he's calling you." So throwing off the cloak, he sprang up and came to Jesus. Then Jesus said to him, "What do you want me to do for you?" The blind man said to him, "My teacher, let me see again." Of course, the irony here is he can already see, but he is seeing through the eyes of faith. Those who try to see through the physical eye, they haven't been able to see anything. They're blind. The blind man said to him, "My teacher, let me see again." Jesus said to him, "Go, your faith has made you well." Notice he doesn't do anything. He doesn't touch the guy. He doesn't go through any ritual. It's the blind person's faith that makes him able to see, which indicates those disciples apparently don't have this enough faith that they're able to see on this level. "Go, your faith has made you well." Immediately, he regained his sight and followed him on the way. That's a phrase that means he became a disciple. He became a disciple. The disciples who can physically see are really blind as bats spiritually. Here's a guy who had no sight at all, and yet his faith allowed him to see. Mark is hoping that some of this stuff sinks in, that we begin to see, literally through our eyes of faith, who this Jesus is. The next scenario is going to be Jesus is ready for his next move, which is going to be go to Jerusalem. He's going to go to Jerusalem because that's where he's going to be killed. And on Palm Sunday, we will begin the Palm Sunday service by reenacting and by reading this again, this entry into Jerusalem, and then we'll repeat this whole Passion narrative as we go along. Tomorrow we'll start with this entry into Jerusalem, and then we're going to watch how it ultimately unfolds. The first 12 chapters, or first 11 chapters basically, of this gospel have been a whole year's worth of ministry in the life of Jesus. From chapter 11 through chapter 16, we're going to talk about 4 days. So you can see how compressed it's going to get. A lot is going to happen in these days. A lot needs to come together. And so we'll start with that entry into Jerusalem tomorrow. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit.